Welcome back. Our guest is Mr. Hamid Karzai, President of Afghanistan. Civilian casualties. This is an issue that's becoming a really huge problem here in Afghanistan. And alienating people, not only against NATO forces, but also against you, Mr. President. Absolutely. We've seen the reaction about the incidents in Kunar and Helmand. What are you going to do about this issue?
Well, I've done a lot about this from the past many years. The tension that was caused between me and the Afghan people and the international community, and the reason they tried to spoil the results of our elections was exactly this issue.
Because they don't believe that you're really genuine about the need to really stop this problem. I'll give you an example. You said you want everybody responsible in the killing of civilians to be handed over to the Afghan authorities.
Yes.
Nobody here in Afghanistan really believe this is a realistic thing.
This is what we wanted. We have this demand. Now, whether this is being agreed with by the international community, and if this is done by the international community respecting our demand, is a different question.
Are you satisfied with the answer that you're getting from NATO forces, particularly the American forces, when it comes to civilian casualties? Because up to this moment, they're trying to distance themselves from the incident, saying, for example, that in Kunar, we were acting in self-defense.
For the past year, since the incident in Shindand in 2008, and the tension that caused, we worked very hard with our partners in the international community to work out a mechanism. That mechanism was created, in which the Afghans participate. That has brought about a reduction in civilian casualties, especially with regard to aerial bombings, which is something good. General McChrystal has worked hard on that, which we admire and with which we have satisfaction. But we want more. The country needs to see much more security for Afghan civilians. The Afghans want civilian casualties to go down completely. And towards that end, we are working.
I still remember that you said during the campaign in Paktia, I think, if elected, you will make sure no Afghan remains in
Absolutely.
Jails run by the Americans. Not only they're still there, the Americans are revamping these jails. Your government is not allowed to visit these people there.
I have only been sworn in about a month and 15 days ago. We have to start to deliver on that promise. It's something that the Afghan people want from their president, want from their government, and I hope our American partners will understand this as an absolutely basic necessity for the confidence of the Afghan people to continue the journey with us, and for America to succeed in Afghanistan. This has to happen. We want our prisoners to be with Afghan authorities, and we don't want any foreign forces taking prisoners in Afghanistan. It is detrimental to them. It is pushing the people away from us and from the war on terror. Therefore, it's a necessity for us and for the American success in Afghanistan, for the NATO success in Afghanistan, to oblige us on it.
But you don't have any problem with these jails described by the international community as black sites stay on Afghan soil? You don't have a problem with that?
Well, we want the prisoners to be given to us. We have a problem with that.
But the jails, you have no problem. They can stay there.
Well, they can be empty jail. I don't care if there is an empty jail in Bagram or somewhere else. We want the Afghans to be arrested by the Afghan government in accordance with the Afghan law, to be if found guilty, to be punished by the Afghan judicial system.
Some additional 40,000 troops are expected to deploy in Afghanistan very soon. Do you think that with this build-up, you will be able to defeat the Taliban?
Well, if these forces are coming to provide protection to the Afghan people and to guard the borders better and to make life easier for the Afghan villages and civilians, welcome. But if these forces are coming only to chase the Taliban at the cost of the Afghan civilians, then of course that's not going to produce any good consequences for us. We are also seeking that while these forces are coming here, that they must provide better training, better equipment to the Afghan forces, to the Afghan army, and to the Afghan police, so we can sooner begin to take responsibility for the defense of our country.
Yeah, one of the NATO targets now in Afghanistan is to beef up Afghan security forces to 400,000 soldiers. Isn't this an ambitious plan, Mr. President?
As a wartime need, as a need of crisis situation, this is something that one can understand. But for Afghanistan, in peacetime, for Afghanistan's future, we must have a force that we can sustain with the Afghan economy, with our own means, and through our own mechanisms. We should probably also include conscription as a way of serving the country. So this is something that we are studying, and as soon as we are through with the London conference, I'll be consulting with the Afghan people on this issue.
The Taliban are not only on the rise, but they're gaining more ground in Afghanistan. Who do you blame for that? Missteps of your government or the NATO forces?
A combination of all things. There were unnecessary operations. Attention was not paid to the sanctuaries beyond the Afghan borders. The Afghan forces were not strengthened in time. The Afghan government in our own security forces made mistakes. NATO forces made some very serious mistakes. As I mentioned earlier, arresting Afghans, civilian casualties, raiding homes. These are all causes for alienation of the Afghan population, and these causes have to stop in order for NATO to have the full backing of the Afghan people.
The recent Taliban against CIA base in Khost province shows that the Taliban, as far as it's been reported so far, are not only there, but they have this capability to plan, to
well, this was a terrorist activity, a condemnable terrorist activity. It's very different. While I'm seeking a better treatment of the Afghan people in these operations, we must also be very clear and strong in condemning terrorist activity like that. Coming and blowing up and killing people is no heroism. It's cowardice. That was terrorism. That's not strength.
But definitely shows that you're dealing with really very powerful.
That doesn't show power. Power is shown in the backing of the civilians. Okay. If the Taliban have the backing of the civilians, that's power. In other words, guns and suicides and mines blowing up innocent lives is no power.
President Obama made it clear that he would like to see his soldiers going back home by 2011. Would you be able, by 2011, to take over security in Afghanistan?
The announcement by President Obama is actually, in terms of an incentive to Afghanistan, a good thing. Afghanistan must very soon begin to provide for its own security, provide for its own needs. So we should speed up our efforts to have our own forces, our own security, our own means to defend our country. And I hope our international partners will support us towards that end. In 18 months, we should be able to provide security in more areas of the for the Afghan population. And I hope by the end of my 5-year term, if we are alive, God keeps us till then, to provide for the Afghan people's security all on our own.
This 5-year term could be perhaps your last chance
to
win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people and the international community. Do you happen to ask yourself sometimes, what if I fail to deliver?
Well, I have to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. I have to be legitimate with the Afghan people. I have to have the trust of the Afghan people if I'm to be a good president for Afghanistan. So the legitimacy of my government has to be given by the Afghan people. With the international community, I don't need to have their favor. They are here for a purpose, which is the fight on terror, and we are working with them for a purpose, which is the stability and safety of Afghanistan. So we have a common purpose in which we have shed our own blood. We have to cooperate together. For the international community, especially for the West, they must respect Afghanistan and its government and understand that we are a people, we are a country. We have a history. We have interests. We have pride. We have dignity. And they should deal with us as such. Our poverty must not become a means of ridicule or insult to us. The reason Afghanistan has suffered so much, the reason Afghanistan is still such a backward country, is because we have cared a lot for our integrity. The British were not allowed into Afghanistan when they were in India as an empire. The Russians were not allowed to play big boss with us, and nor should be others thinking the same way. So Afghanistan is very touchy about this question.
How do you see yourself, more of an optimist or a realist?
I was a great optimist to the point of naivete when we began 8 years ago. I'm beginning to be a realist to the core now.
When I first met you in this same place 8 years ago, you had high hopes that Afghanistan would be a model in the country in terms of democracy and stability. Don't you regret sometimes tending to overstate, Mr. President?
With regard to democracy, we have become a good model. Look, we did all that democracy requires. We have a constitution that we respected. We have elections. My first election was accused of corruption and fraud, mainly by the Western media, and we went to the second round. That's democracy. We have a parliament yesterday that refused 17 of my nominations for cabinet. So with regard to democracy, Afghanistan has done its job very, very well. The Afghan people have delivered on it. They came to vote. In spite of the death threats to them, in spite of the bombs and rockets falling on them. With regard to economic development, we have done very, very well, keeping the conditions that we are in, the climate change, the lack of resources, the lack of capacity. In terms of education, we have delivered very well. In health services, we have done very well. In terms of security, we have failed. In terms of providing security to the Afghan people, we have failed. In terms of
undermining the Taliban, you've failed.
That is security. We don't want to undermine the Taliban. We want them to come and live a peaceful life in their own country. We want to undermine the terrorists. And I see a difference between the mainstream of the Taliban and the terrorists. The mainstream of the Taliban are thousands of young Afghans who have no hope and no place and fear. And we must bring them back to a hope and a place and remove the fear. That's what I want NATO countries to understand with us, that the war on terror is not in the Afghan villages. It's not in the pursuit of every man that's wearing a turban and has a beard and is wearing a national dress of Afghanistan. That these are the sons of this country, that they must not be intimidated. And then we will have peace and success.
Mr. President, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Talk to Al Jazeera. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, goodbye for now.